Hey, English 112. Miss Brewer here. I'm just going to do a quick feedback video on your initial discussion forum that you guys took part in last week. So I have some notes about some of the things that you said and some of the analysis that you guys provided. And I just wanted to kind of give my feedback. So you'll note that I don't really respond during the discussion. I don't want what I say to color what you guys are saying and how you guys are analyzing and interacting with one another. So I try to wait until afterwards, and then here I am to tell you some things, some thoughts about your forum and things like that. Just for grading purposes and expectations to start out with, make sure that you guys are properly punctuating poetry. Titles of poems, they're always properly capitalized and they go in quotation marks. So make sure that you're doing that. It's really important when you're writing a reply to someone's initial response that you make sure that you're not just saying, hey, I really liked what you had to say, great job. That's not what I'm looking for. And that I think is outlined in expectations for discussions and how I grade discussions. So it's really important that you are propelling the conversation forward. Make sure that you're meeting the minimum word requirement, which is 150 words, okay, not a sentence. Make sure that you are adding to what they've said. So we don't pass judgment. It's not up to you to evaluate their response. That's up to me. So seeing things like, I really think you wrote a great response. That doesn't matter. All right. Whether or not you think it's great. Now, if they shed some light on something or, made you see something from a different point of view, that's great. You can say stuff like that, but be specific. What did they say? How did your viewpoint change? Pull some lines from the poetry if you need to, okay? So really be specific. You can ask questions. You can give a different type of example or anecdote, but you need to propel the conversation forward in your replies. That's really important. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the poems. Oh, also for the poetry that we're doing, make sure that you have read all of the poems, and make sure for the spoken word that you look at all of the spoken word poems, okay? You can't know which one speaks to you the most if you only pick 2 to do. You need to read them all, and then you pick the ones that you want to respond to for your assignments. Let's talk about how timely these poems are. I will tell you that when I selected the poetry for this course, it was probably back in March, maybe, when I was creating the poetry. And I had no idea. I mean, I knew it was timely, and I knew that these were issues. But I had no idea that the month of May was going to happen and all of these kind of issues were going to come to the forefront in our climate and really kind of come to a head. What that shows is just how relevant these poems are. So I think that's really interesting. And then a couple of you guys, I'm not going to talk about all of the poems, but just a couple of things that stood out to me. So for Caged Bird, one thing I want to say about all of the poems is make sure that you are remembering when the poem was written and who it was written by when you try to think of theme, right? Now, you can say that Caged Bird reminds you of COVID in a way, but definitely that would not be the theme that Maya Angelou would be talking on. She would be talking about, the oppression, that she would have felt as an African-American woman during the time that she wrote the poem. So that's important to remember. And a lot of you guys did mention COVID, which is okay. I mean, I get it. And especially, we're stuck in our houses more than we're used to. So I get that. But I do just want to say, if this is the biggest oppression that we face, then we're the free bird. So just be aware of that. And Maya Angelou would say that as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about Caged Bird. This was really cool. Rebecca, for Poem About My Rights and Cast Color Denomination, Rebecca tied them together with the labels, which I thought was a really neat way to read those 2 poems. And they were looking at labels kind of almost different ways. Like Dickinson's almost saying they don't we make them matter, but they don't matter to death, right? So why are they such an issue? Whereas Jordan is really pointing out the specifics, and I'm quoting Rebecca here. Jordan points out specifics of identity and experience. And so for Jordan, those things are important, right? Because the way that we're treated here on earth relates right back to that, okay? So I think that those are two interesting takes to look at labels, or maybe even look at how that labeling has changed over the years or something to that effect. Okay, so that was really interesting. I look at the world. A lot of you guys talked about Hughes, specifically that. In my other classes, a lot of people focused on the Battle of the Landlord. But you guys did, a lot of you guys did, I look at the world. And Krista said in a reply to Brandy, if inequality is not real, why has it been talked about for so many years? And I think that's a valid point, okay? It's continually talked about because it's continually been an issue. And, you know, continuing to talk about it's not gonna change until it changes. And so it's definitely a common theme in many different art forms, right? I mean, movies, books, songs, poetry, all of it, you know, there's people are talking about those experiences. So yeah, it's definitely like a trope that we look at throughout literature and everything. I'm looking at tableau. So Weston looked up the definition of a tableau. Good job. I mean, if you don't know what the word means and it's the title of the poem, you might need to look that up. It's a term we use in theater, right? When you make a really pretty stage picture, okay? It's called a tableau. And it's like a snapshot, right? So then what is Cullen saying about the world with that snapshot of those two kids? And their indifference and they're not knowing about the fact that tableau is something that would be taboo, you know? Rebecca made a really nice reference to Frederick Douglass's quote about slaves sing most when they are the most unhappy. I think that related back to actually Caged Bird, but I just thought that was a really nice quote to relate back to. And poem by poem is what I'm looking at now. Charmaine said, every person has a poem to write and it can bring forth change. And then Weston, in reply to her, said that words have a way of affecting people. Great. Can words affect change? So I actually do believe, obviously, that they can. That's why we're reading these words, and believe in kind of sparking social change and through social justice and through literature, okay? And by reading about other people's experiences and stories. And you guys will participate in a discussion forum later in this semester from one of my favorite authors, Chimamanda Adichie. And she does a TED Talk on the dangers of a single story, like having only one understanding of people that are different than you. And the way that we can have more understanding, right, is by reading these words and changing our minds and then changing others' minds. So I thought that was really cool. And then I also just want to point out the structure to that poem, because a lot of people like maybe had difficulty because of the structure and the way that it was written, but I think that that's definitely intentional. And in my last, one of my other classes, they said something about it being gasping for air, kind of reminding them of that. And I also think it also reminds me of like a spraying of bullets. Okay, so think about it that way and maybe reread that and see if that structure changes anything for you. And then lastly, I'm just going to look at the Barefoot Boy really quickly because it's important. The Barefoot Boy almost seems like it's not talking about a social issue. And you're like, well, this is way different than the other poems that we're reading, right? But it does talk about the importance of nature and being outside and those types of things. And so you may be able to tie it into some of the spoken word poetry that we're looking at this week. So think about it that way. And I did think it was interesting that Daphne brought in the boy in the striped pajamas. I didn't even think about that. You know, like literally he barefoot, right, in a concentration camp, and then literally caged with a caged bird. So that kind of an oppression too. So that I thought was a really interesting relation, okay, to a different piece of literature. So you guys have your initial response for your spoken word poetry that's going to be due Thursday. just remember that you need to be quoting the poems. And your initial responses this class, for the most part, were really good. So that's awesome. Just make sure that you guys are really delving into your responses and trying to propel that conversation forward. And you will see a lecture video coming from me for next week in the next couple of days, and the next week will open up. As usual, if you guys have questions, you can always check in. Tomorrow, the Thursday the 2nd, is a holiday, so I will not have a live office hour, but I will be checking my email throughout the weekend. I hope you guys have a safe 4th and enjoy time with family 6 feet apart and wearing masks. Have a great 4th of July.